It's the middle of winter. The temperatures outside are well below zero, and the lights just went out again. For millions of Ukrainians, this isn't a power outage, it's a weapon. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, one of the most consistent features of the war hasn't been tanks rolling across the steppe or infantry battles in ruined cities. It's been missiles and drones hitting power plants, heating stations, and electrical grids, right as winter sets in. But here's the thing. Ukraine has been hitting Russia's energy infrastructure too. Oil refineries, chemical plants, fuel depots. So are both sides doing the same thing? Is this just two countries mirroring each other's tactics? The answer is no, and the legal and moral reasoning behind that distinction matters more than you might think. Today we're going to break down why targeting energy infrastructure sits in a legal gray zone, how international law actually handles it, and why, despite surface appearances, Russian and Ukrainian strikes are fundamentally different in both intent and legality. Let's start with the rules of war, specifically the Geneva Convention and their additional protocols, which are the backbone of international humanitarian law. Under Article 52 of Additional Protocol 1, parties to a conflict may only target what are called military objectives. The definition matters here. A military objective is an object that by its nature, location, purpose, or use makes an effective contribution to military action, and whose destruction offers a definite military advantage. Notice what that means though. It's not enough to claim something could help the enemy. You have to show concrete, tangible military benefit to destroying it. Alongside this is the principle of proportionality. Even a legitimate military target can't be struck if the expected harm to civilians is greater than the military gain. Now, here's where energy infrastructure gets complicated. Power grids, oil refineries, fuel pipelines, these are what you can call dual-use infrastructure. They power civilian homes, but they also fuel armies, supply logistic networks, and keep military command systems running. The Geneva Convention doesn't ban striking them outright, but they don't give a free pass either. The legality of any given strike depends entirely on why you're hitting it, what the military benefit is, and how much civilian suffering comes as a result. Russia's campaign against Ukrainian energy infrastructure has been systematic, escalating, and crucially, timed in a very specific way. The most intense aerial campaigns haven't coincided with major Russian military offensives on the front line. They've coincided with the onset of winter, when temperatures drop. That's when missiles fly. By the peak of one aerial campaign in the winter of 2024 to 25, over 8 million Ukrainians were left without electricity, in freezing conditions. That pattern of freezing is very significant. If the goal were to damage Ukraine's military capacity, you'd expect the heaviest strikes during ground offensives, when disrupting power would have the most direct battlefield effects. Instead, the timing suggests a different objective, making life unbearable for the civilian population. This is what international lawyers call collective punishment, punishing an entire civilian population for the actions of their government or military. And under the laws of war, that is definitely illegal. Russia, of course, disagrees. Here's where things get philosophical and legally thorny. Because Russia's justification for its strikes isn't just this is a military target, it runs much deeper than that. Russia has, since at least 2014, refused to fully recognize Ukraine as a legitimate sovereign state. From the Kremlin's perspective, Ukraine is something closer to a wayward territory, a quasi-state propped up by Western interferences, whose current government is characterized as a terrorist regime. In 2022, Russia formally labeled Ukraine in these terms. This matters enormously for international law, because the entire framework of the laws of war is built on the foundation of state equality, the idea that all sovereign states have the same rights and the same obligations. If you deny that a state is truly sovereign, you can start to argue that normal rules don't fully apply anymore. Russia uses this framing to justify strikes on Ukrainian civilians under the logic of eliminating support for an illegitimate regime. It's a dangerous precedent, a self-serving interpretation of international law that bends to military strategy. And luckily, the international community has largely rejected it. Ukraine's sovereignty is recognized by the United Nations and the vast majority of the world's nations. Ukraine has every legal right under the Charter, but also in the eyes of its allies and friends to defend itself. Now, let's take a look at the other side. Ukraine has conducted extensive drone campaigns targeting Russian energy infrastructure, particularly oil refineries, fuel storage facilities, and chemical plants. And these are real strikes, causing real damage, and Russia has been very loud in condemning them as terrorist. But here's the key difference. Look at what Ukraine is targeting and why. Oil refineries and fuel depots don't just heat Russian homes. They are the direct material lifeline of the Russian war machine. Fuel powers Russian tanks, aircrafts, and logistic convoys. Revenue from oil exports fund the entire military operation. Ukraine isn't striking these facilities to make Russian civilians cold. It's targeting the infrastructure that directly allows Russia to keep on fighting. And evidently, Ukraine has been succeeding. Ukrainian drone strikes on fuel infrastructure have repeatedly caused frontline disruption, forcing Russia to reroute logistics and divert resources. There's a demonstrable, traceable military benefit to their actions. This is exactly the kind of analysis that international humanitarian law requires before a strike can be considered legal. Ukraine is also operating from a fundamentally different moral and legal position. As the defending party in this conflict, recognized internationally as the victim of an unprovoked invasion, Ukraine's strikes fall under the right to self-defense under the UN Charter. Its actions are constrained by a genuine effort to stay within the laws of war, targeting military and economic infrastructure rather than civilian populations. There's something almost paradoxical going on here worth noting. Russia, whose strikes on civilian infrastructure are widely condemned as war crimes, repeatedly calls Ukrainian drone strikes on its oil facilities acts of terrorism. It invokes international law to criticize Ukraine, even while it itself blatantly violates it. But this isn't just hypocrisy, it's a strategy. By using the language of international law, Russia is trying to frame the conflict as one of two equally guilty parties. It gives wavering countries a reason to stay neutral, and it muddies the moral clarity of Ukraine's position. This is why a distinction between the two sides' strikes matters beyond the legal text. International law is only as powerful as the shared moral values that underpin it. When one party weaponizes the language of law while ignoring its substance, it weakens the entire framework for everyone else who depends on it. As political scholar Andrew Hurrell put it, legitimacy in the use of force isn't just about legal compliance. It's about the values and the intentions behind the use of force. So, let's bring it back to the central question. When states target energy infrastructure, is it a war crime or sound strategy? To be honest, the answer is it depends. The Geneva Convention doesn't prohibit striking energy infrastructure, but they do require that any such strike have a legitimate military objective, and that the civilian harm is not disproportionate to the military gain. By those standards, Russia's systematic winter-timed campaign against Ukrainian power grids and heating stations, which has left millions in the cold, fails the test. It looks far more like collective punishment against civilians rather than a lawful military strategy. Ukraine's campaign against Russian fuel and refinery infrastructure, by contrast, targets the material engine of Russia's war effort, has produced measurable military results, and is conducted with far greater restraint towards civilian populations. This doesn't mean that Ukraine's strikes are beyond scrutiny. Every military action should be examined, but the moral and legal weight of the two campaigns is not equivalent, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to people paying the heaviest price. The Russo-Ukrainian war is forcing the international community to confront hard questions about how international humanitarian law is enforced, interpreted, and respected in an era when even its language can be weaponized. The answer to those questions will echo well beyond this conflict. If you want to go deeper, the sources for this video are linked in the description below, including the IEA's analysis of Ukraine's energy system under attack and the relevant articles of the Geneva Convention. If you found this useful, please consider subscribing, and remember, stay curious.